All right, so this is where we left off in the last example, and we have this file up here called Cotner-P2FLA, and I had mentioned, that it was just so far what we'd done was just practice, but I actually had set up the stage the way that I wanted it to be. So what we can do is just really quickly, if you wanted to keep this file just for reference, what you can do is just look at the properties of the stage by clicking on the stage, not on a symbol, but on the stage, and then looking at the properties. And remember that we made it 1340 by 580, okay? And we can just easily remake that. All right, so I'm going to close this file, and I'll show you what we can do. Let's just go over and find our folder where our project currently is. And while the file is closed, I'm just going to rename that current file. I'll copy that. I'll rename the current file. Instead of Cotner P2, let's just call it Cotner Practice or something like that, okay? All right, so now if you want to actually make a file that you would want to call your actual project file, and then we can also rename the Swift as well. Let's do that too. Let's call it practice. All right, and then that way these two things won't get confused. What we can do is make a new file in Animate, and we'll go to New, and we'll choose ActionScript 3 again, and then we said 1340 by 580. And these numbers don't have to be exact, just a good starting place. You can always change it. You saw how easily in the last video that you could change it. We'll make the background color black, and we'll leave the frames per second at 24. Okay, and let's just go ahead and center our stage, and we can also do fit to window as well. That's something else that we can do. And now we've got this new document, and I'll save it, and I'll actually call this one Cotner P2, or you can call it whatever you want, however you need to do it to keep it straight. Yeah, so now what we have is this blank document, and I want to start thinking about how I can lay this out. And one of the things that you could think about is how big you want your video to be. And most videos, let's open up a calculator. Okay, so most videos are going to be, let's just say a 16:9 ratio. So 16:9 at a 720p would be 720 divided by 1280, because 1280 is how wide it would be, right? And so that is the percentage of height, or that's the height percentage of the actual width, right? So if we wanted to figure out a different ratio, let's say that we want our thing to be, actually let's just put this off to the side for a second, and let's take our rectangle and let's just sort of draw something out, and we can kind of figure out sort of a general space that it might take up. And I can go ahead and click this, and if I take the free transform tool, then I can sort of figure out exactly how big I actually want the thing to be. So let's pull it over a little bit, and you can see that that's maybe a little, we could maybe have it a little bit bigger. So maybe somewhere around 850 wide. So 850, we can type that in. All right, and then if we figure out, okay, well that's 850, right? To figure out what the approximate height then would end up being for most of your movies, you would take this ratio and multiply it times the new width that you've chosen. So we'll say times 850, and so that means that the height of the video is going to be approximately 480 tall, roughly, something like that, okay? And so we can unlink this here, and we can make that box 480 tall. And then that way, now let's relink it. That gives us some general idea of how big our video might be in terms of the scope of, how much room we would have over here on the left if we wanted to put our card information. And of course, you don't have to lay it out like this. You could put it in the center, you could put it on the left, you could put it, wherever you wanted. Your dimensions of the actual Flash or Animate player, it doesn't have to be these dimensions. You could, have something that was tall if you wanted, with information underneath it. However you want to do it. Probably a horizontal orientation though, or landscape orientation, is probably going to be better for viewing. And so I think I'm actually going to type in so that we can see this in its entirety to get a better idea of the kind of space. Now, the other thing that you could do too is instead of trying to sort of visually align this like this, what you can also do is there's an alignment tool right here, right? And we can choose the center alignment tool. And if you were to go right here and click on that, it's going to align it centered horizontally, okay? If you were to click on this one, it vertically centers it, right? So if you want to vertically center it, it's this guy. If you want to horizontally center it, it's this guy. If you want to line it right up to the edge, right? So if you've used Illustrator or InDesign, you know, or Photoshop, some of these tools might seem familiar, right? But anyway, the thing that I am going to most care about at the moment is I want to align it on so that it's aligned vertically, all right? And I can sort of just manually scoot it over by clicking, holding Shift down, and then dragging it so that it constrains it to the horizontal x-axis, like that. Okay, and so that looks like it's, you know, pretty even all the way around, and that gives me enough space to start to work with stuff over here. Now, this is just a placeholder, this shape. It's not anything for real. In fact, that green is so dominant that I'm actually just going to make it like a gray color as a placeholder, okay, so that it doesn't start to affect everything else that I'm designing over here on the left. All right, and so that becomes my effective placeholder. And what's happened by me putting this here, it's actually placed it on layer 1. And so I could label this, I could call it video, let's just call it, yeah, let's call it video movie placeholder or something, or video placeholder. Um, And we can always change the name of this later, but for right now, that's the video placeholder. And we can know that that's where the movie is supposed to go. And if I don't want to, you know, mess this up by accident, I can click on this little lock right here, and that means that I can't adjust it by accidentally clicking it and dragging it or moving it around. And because I'm not really going to do anything specific later with this placeholder, I don't need to turn it into a symbol or anything like that, okay? So now that we've got that set up, I'm going to go ahead and see how it's unsaved up here. I'm going to save, right, so that I have it saved. And then the next thing I want to do is start to figure out what is going to go over here. And definitely you need to put the title of the piece. You can either call it the word that you picked for your assignment, or you could call it something else if you wanted to. If you want to give it some other name, that's fine too. You can retroactively name it something that is not specifically the word. For instance, if you picked the word kindness and you did something based on kindness, maybe you don't want to call it that. Maybe you want to call it something different. You could do that. That's okay. All right, so to do that, let's talk a little bit about text. All right, so over here on the right, there's a text tool. And if I click on that, you see that my property panel changes and I get some different choices. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a color. So if I click on this, I can start to select from here, or I can also click on this color wheel and select from a gamut from this larger range of color. Right now I'm going to actually click cancel. I'm going to go ahead and, for the just simplicity of it, I'm going to select from one of these sort of quick colors, and I'll probably select this this color that is FFCC99. And when I say FFCC99, I'm talking about this hexadecimal number right here. And you can add it as a swatch. You can also adjust the alpha transparency, all right? But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick with that. All right, and so that's going to be my color. The other thing that I want to do is I want to choose from a font family. Now, fonts are very sort of tricky, right? Fonts are specific in that you can look at this kind of like a website if you've ever designed for the web. If not, that's okay too, where you're going to be delivering this content so that people with different computers are going to be looking at it. And unless you embed the font, or unless you're doing something you know, specifically scripting out web fonts, then what's going to end up happening is, you know, you're going to be subject to whatever fonts are available on that end user's computer. So where I have sans, what that would do with underscore sans is it would automatically choose their default sans serif, which is typically Arial for all computers, whether it's Linux, Windows, or Mac, all right? But we want to do something that's not just in a sans serif. In fact, let me just show you kind of the difference of how these things can look. Let's just say, for instance, I'm going to choose what is referred to as a safe font. I'm going to choose Arial. There are a number of different safe fonts that you could look at, and if you go to the w3schools.com website, there is a search that you could do right here for web safe fonts, and you find this article, and it shows you some different ones. There are some standard serif fonts that are web safe, meaning that they're cross platform for Windows and Mac, right? So they're all, Windows and Macs are all going to have Georgia, Palatino linotype, Times New Roman, and then for sans serif, meaning that they don't have these little flippy-do serifs right here. Sans serifs are going to be Arial's the most common one, Arial Black. Comic Sans, don't use Comic Sans. It's a terrible font to use. Anyway, Impact, we've got Lucida Sans Unicode. All right, so a number of other ones. You can read these. Trebuchet sometimes is a nice one. It's a little different. Okay, and then monospace fonts. Typically, I'm not really fond of you guys using those either unless there's a really good reason. Monospace means that each letter takes up the same amount of space as each other letter. So the letter I, for instance, takes up the same amount of space as the letter capital T or the letter M. Okay, these other ones are proportional fonts. Okay, so you can take a look at those if you want and use a web safe font. Arial's your most common one for sans serif. Times New Roman is your most common one typically for serifs. So let's just start by typing something. I'll click my text tool, make sure it's selected, and then I can, first of all, you see how it's giving me a little no symbol, a little anti symbol? That's because I've locked the only layer that I have available. So I need to create a new layer here, and I'll call this one, let's call it title. All right, and let's, I can just click, that's one option, and I can just start to type. So I could put whatever the title is here, right? And if I choose my selection tool, you see that I can then move it around, do whatever I need to do, right? I can sort of line it up where the top of the movie I think is going to be, right? Now, the other thing that I can do is I can double click inside of it and it automatically takes me back to that text tool. And I could have also created a text box where I give it a certain amount of space before it starts wrapping, right? So now I haven't hit the return key on any of these, but because I can grab this little thing at the very top, I can tell it how wide it can be. All right, so that's another way that you can create text in such a way that it will allow you to keep it within a certain amount of space. And if you look under paragraph, it gives you some different options. I can either do left align, I can do justify, or excuse me, I'm sorry, center, that's center, not justify. I can do right align, or I can do justify, where it will, if you're not sure what justify means, it means it takes it to edge so that it will fit perfectly. And what that does is it changes the letter spacing in between each of the letters so that it can make it fit. Sometimes it looks okay and sometimes it looks terrible. Just depends on what it is that you're doing. So anyway, I don't necessarily want it to look just like that, right? So I'm going to get rid of it and I'll just leave the word title. And if you wanted, like for instance, if your group was going to do something where you guys had some kind of common template, then you could set the limitation and width here so that you know exactly how wide it would be. I don't necessarily recommend that because unless you've got a really long title, which you shouldn't have, you don't want it to be wrapping and looking strange here. So the other thing that you can do too is you can change this and adjust the size. So for instance, if I hover over the size here, I can go down or up or whatever. So I can get a size that might be a more amenable size to what it is that we're trying to do. And so if I were going to use, for instance, the word inspiration as my title here, then I could go and double click inside of here and I can say inspiration, and maybe I want to do it all caps. All right, and then you see that, oh, it doesn't really fit with all caps, not quite. Well, I can also, in addition to changing the scale of the text, right, that's kind of small, maybe it's not, maybe it's okay. I can also adjust the type that I'm using. So instead of Arial, I could go down and see what something else looks like, because Arial's really boring. Maybe what I want to use is like a Google font that I've downloaded. So if I choose Oswald, for instance, And it didn't find Oswald for some reason here. So let me just scroll through and I can find Oswald. Oswald is a nice Google font that um, is condensed. So it's good for tight spaces that need to have, you know, sort of like a good readability. And still have like a good presence. And so because it's condensed, you can see it takes up a lot less space. This might be, you know, a good choice for you is, you know, depending on what the names of the titles are, it might be a good choice for you so that you can have like a larger word or a larger amount, you know, space for your text there. But you know, still have something that is big enough that's, you know, readable and, you know, can fit on one line, whatever. So anyway, explore the different fonts. The only thing though is if you use something that's not web safe, is that you'll have to use this embed option. Don't choose embed though until you know for a fact that you're going to use that font. And what I would recommend is, since this is going to be, you know, potentially a group project, or if you had different fonts on different pages, you want to try to limit the fonts. So this is where you guys choosing fonts as a group is really going to make sense if you're doing group work. Because you don't want to embed a ton of fonts, because it's going to load down the video, or excuse me, load down the project and make the file size bigger and slow it down potentially. So anyway, if I go back here and I click this with my text tool, all right, so I can go inside. If I click inside, I can actually widen it a little bit, and I can make some decisions about, you know, maybe I actually want that to sort of fit inside this space a little bit differently. Right, so maybe I want it to be this far from the edge, because it looks like this video is, you know, this far from the edge. And that brings up another point too, is that I could turn on my rulers by going up to view rulers like this, and I could also put guides on here. And the other thing too is you can also view the grid if you want to show the grid, so that you can see, you know, like a little bit better. If I wanted to blow this up, for instance, you could kind of do like a count and go, okay, well, it looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grid marks away on that edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so if you said, all right, well, I want this to be equidistant, right? You could take the type and then sort of nudge it over so that it starts in the same space away from the edge, and then you know for a fact that you're in good shape. And then if you wanted, you could also go ahead and just draw some guides by pulling them in from the edges. You have to have the rulers present to do that though. And then you could draw the edge for your movie there, right? So that you'll have a pretty good sense of like where your movie needs to go. All right. And you could also draw these in too. We'll drop that there. And you can drop this here, and that kind of gives you some basic boundaries. I'll turn my grid off, so we can go back here to turn the grid this way off, and I can still see my guides. And then you can always show and hide your guides if you want. Where it says view again, you can go to guides and you can show them. You can also lock them. Let's lock them for now. You can lock them and unlock them, that way you don't accidentally move them, and you can see that that works pretty well, and it still will fit in frame. And then I'll go ahead and center this. And so you can see the amount of space then that we have to work with. Now, one of the other things too is that it looks like one of the things I didn't really account for is that I've got my my margin here, but I don't have like my gutter here. So if I wanted to be consistent in how much space I have in between my video and my type here, I could turn that back on. Let's go back to my grid. Let's show it again. And I could go ahead and draw, and also let's blow that up a little bit more. I could go ahead and draw my ruler in so that I create my gutter. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away. All right, and so that means I could probably make my little text box just a little bit bigger. I can draw it, and I can also, if I wanted, I could turn on a snap where I can turn snapping on and it'll snap to whatever I want. Okay, so, and let's turn that grid back off because it's really hard to see other stuff. So there we go. And now if I wanted to type in here, it would constrain me to typing so that I don't go into this gutter space, right? So I'm going to go back over and knock this back down to 50%. We'll center it. And then that way, just so you can see what will happen if I decide to start typing, let's say inspirational, right? See what it does is it knocks it down to the next line, okay? And it gives you some sense. The other thing that you could do if you wanted is you could start to use letter spacing. Let's say that you wanted to have this justified and your word is sort of short. You could increase what's referred to as the letter spacing, right? So, oops, and you have to make sure that you select the entire word. So you could either select it like this, like, right? And you can change the letter spacing like that. You can get right up to the edge. And then if it, if it needs a little adjustment, like maybe it's 4.5 or something like that, you can come over here and try that. And that's a little bit too much, maybe 4.25. And that seems to work okay. And it takes it right up to the edge. And you can decide if you like that letter spacing or not. That's one way of doing it. The other way is if you don't want to actually select individual letters in the word, you could just select the entire box and like I have now, right? And then I could change the letter spacing for the entire box. So that's my title. All right. And the next thing that I would want to do is I want to go ahead and create my byline. So you can do this a number of different ways, and you might look at this letter spacing though and decide that you don't like it. That's up to you. I can also go ahead and take my next tool right here, and I could decide whether or not I like it also justified. So one thing I could do is I could make my title and my byline together. So if I did that, I might want to just keep it in the same layer, right? So if I wanted to do it that way, I can double click this and say title, byline, like that. And I can just come in here, double click, and hit the return key to advance down to the next, and I can say bye, and then I can put my name. Okay, now I don't like the way that that looks. I'm going to take the justification off of that. So under paragraph, I'm going to do left aligned like this for right now. I could leave justification on, but anyway, I can also set the letter spacing back down. I'm just going to remove that. So take it off to 0, and it's still too long. So what I can do is I can just select my byline, and for that I can change the size if I want, right? And so I can make my byline either small or I can make it big enough to fit the entire space like that. So it's up to you how you want to do that. Um, I kind of don't like that. I think it's a little too big. The byline has too much weight, and I think I actually don't really like it justified necessarily. It's, you don't want the type to sort of look unnatural. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scale this back down to something like that maybe. And I'm also going to take the guides off really quickly. So let's go up here to view, and I'm going to turn my guides so it says show guides. And I might look at that and try to figure out if I am happy with it. I also don't know if I like it. It looks like the text is, even though it's saying it's aligned right there, it actually doesn't look visually aligned until I put it there. So, but that might be too high. I might actually not want it to start all the way up there, so I can move it down some, right? And I can just sort of make a decision about where I want these things to go. All right, and one of the things that you'll need to consider is that I would like for you to also put like some sort of icon of yourself here. And you can design that whether the icon goes just below or maybe you'll have the icon with the byline next to it. It's up to you. But also remember you'll need to put some sort of navigation down here to either be able to navigate. You have some different options. You'll either be able to navigate through your entire show, which means you could jump to any other video straight from this navigation, or you could just have something that goes back to maybe like your home page, so that you're forced to navigate from there. So it's really up to you. One thing you want to be careful of is if you put other navigation down here to other people's videos, that it doesn't look like those are other videos that you also did, right? Because they're going to be on your page, sort of under your name. So you would need to design the navigation in a way that it would, very easily translate and be understandable as, other videos that are not necessarily all belonging to you, all right? So best you can. So the other thing too, now that I've shown you a little bit about how to do the text, let's say that we as a group, or I have decided for the entire project, if it is in fact all my project, um, that I'm going to go over here and say, all right, I'm going to use Oswald. That's the font I want. Or maybe it's one of two fonts or something like that. Now what I need to do is I need to embed it, right? So if the other thing too is that I can select this and I can tell it to be selectable text right here. And that way, if want somebody to be able to have selectable text whenever they're watching the movie in HTML or in a Swift file, they can actually highlight it and select it and copy the text, which is good. So the next thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and I'm going to say embed. Oh, the other thing too, just so you know, is I could add web fonts with this little world looking little globe button. If I was using dynamic text and if this were an HTML5 canvas document, but it is not an HTML5 canvas document, it is an ActionScript document. So I am not able to use these Google Web Fonts. What I need to do instead is I need to be able to embed them. So I'm going to go ahead and click on embed. And what that's going to do for me is it's going to, and actually, first of all, I'll go ahead and name this. I'll call it Oswald. Okay, and it's going to allow for me to cache these fonts, download these vectors, and cache them on the user's computer so that they can have access. Now, I'm not going to choose all because that's a lot of fonts, and I'm not going to be using all of them. And, maybe I'm going to use numbers, maybe I'll use punctuation, right? Maybe I would do something with some basic Latin stuff, right? But probably not. All right, so I'm going to leave that off. Basic Latin would be special glyphs that would be for, like special characters in other languages. So if you wanted to include that, you could, right? But chances are you're not going to use it. But I wouldn't do all of these other ones, right? So we'll say okay to that. All right, and so now that's going to be embedded, so it'll look okay on other people's computers. And I downloaded Oswald onto my computer from Google Fonts, and if you're not sure how to do that, I will show you how to do that really quick. So you'll go to fonts.google.com and you'll scroll through and look at all these different ones. Now, I'm not going to make this a comprehensive Google Fonts lesson. I actually have one that you could watch separately. But just real quickly, let's say that you liked one of these, like let's say that you liked Lotto, okay? You could click to add it, and it shows you down here your family selected. If I click on this, then it shows you these things that you can do with web, but that's not what we're going to be doing. We actually need to download it and install it on our computer. So you would click this download button, and you're going to choose on your computer where to put this. And I would recommend that if you're on your own computer and not like just the school computer, you put it in a place that you can actually keep it so that it will be available to you in the future. Like I keep mine in a special place on my computer that is specifically for downloaded fonts. And anyway, so what you would do is you would download it and then you would unzip it, and then using like on Windows, you can either just add it to your font folder, or you can, if you're on a Mac, there's a free tool called Font Book that comes on your computer, and you can add it to Font Book, and then it automatically activates it. So I'm not going to walk through that process right now, but I just wanted to show you it's really simple to get stuff from Google. If you want to watch a more comprehensive version of this, you can do so, and it shows you all of how you can navigate through the Google Fonts. But let's get back to this, and let's go ahead and also I wanted to show you too about text under paragraph. It doesn't just have, left, center, right, and justified formatting. You can also do hanging margins and things like that down here, just like you can in any kind of normal like formatting program like Illustrator or InDesign. Okay, so that's a good place to stop. I think we've figured out how to set that stage back up again, do some stuff with text, and do a little bit of manipulation of the layers. And so now what we can do is go ahead and save this and move on to the next demo where we'll get into importing some stuff and publishing a copy of your Swift file so you can see what it looks like.